With over a decade of experience working on conservation projects in Europe, Africa, Asia, and Central America, John recognizes the importance of partnerships in delivering social, environmental, and economic benefits. Jamaica was the first project he launched after joining Bat Conservation International in 2017, and he makes regular visits to the island to help further the work. And if you stay tuned to our updates, we should be having an exciting trip perhaps later in the year, where we will be able to look at some of the bats that John may be talking about this evening. So without further ado, Dr. John Flanders, thank you so much for giving this talk for us. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you for the invite as well. This project's very near and dear to my heart, so I'm always happy to talk about this work. So hopefully everyone can see the presenter view. So yeah, I'm basically going to be talking about the work that we're doing in Jamaica, protecting the island's 2 critically endangered bats. And while this is me presenting, this is very much much wider project involving NEPA, the Jamaican Cave Organisation, and communities from Polygrounds. Actually, you name it, there's a whole ton of people who I really should thank, but I've only got a short time. But this is really a group effort, and I couldn't do it without the whole support of the whole team involved. So really, this is just me talking about the work in general, but I just want to give a quick overview first about Bat Conservation International. If you don't really know what we do, our mission is quite simple, is to end extinctions worldwide by protecting bats and their habitats. And we've broken ourselves down into 4 different missions. Mission 1 is endangered species interventions, which obviously I oversee. Then we have protect and restore landscapes. We have conducting high priority research and delivering scalable solutions. And then we have inspiring through experience. And if anyone is ever in the US, I highly recommend you check out Bracken Cave, which is the largest bat cave that we know of in the world, with around 20 million bats at its peak. So we purchased this a while back to save it from developers. And it's an amazing sight to watch that number of bats emerge. So if you're ever in the US, really check that out. But I have to say, you're really spoiled being based in Jamaica, because it's just a phenomenal place for bats. So I'm really looking forward to talking about that. Just as a quick overview of the work that we do in endangered species interventions, Jamaica is one of our key projects at the moment that we're running, but we're launching a number of other projects around the world. You'll notice a lot of these are just focused on the tropics, and that's really because this is where the high biodiversity hotspots are for bats, and unfortunately that's where you normally find the most endangered populations as well. But Jamaica is one of the very few countries that we're working in that has 2 critically endangered bats, so it was really a high priority for us, and especially when I joined BCI, it was something we wanted to get involved in as soon as we could. So without further ado, Jamaica as a whole is really an important site for not only bat biodiversity, but biodiversity as a whole. It's a real important contributor to biodiversity for the whole Caribbean basin. And bats really play an important part of this. For a very small island, you have 21 species of bats representing 6 different families, which is pretty damn impressive. 5 of these are endemic to Jamaica, 8 are restricted to the Caribbean as a whole, and importantly, 10 are obligate cave dwellers. And this is important because you'll see the map with a number of red dots on it. All of those red dots constitute caves that have been recognized and logged. And I have to give a big shout out to the Jamaican Cave Organisation for really keeping these surveys up to date and letting us know about important caves with bats in. But there's a huge opportunity for bats in Jamaica. Unfortunately, a lot of these caves have had disturbance, so the number of species used in some of these caves has decreased, which is one of the reasons why there are now 2 species that are critically endangered. We have huge biodiversity of bats as well. This is just an example of 2 different species. The one on the left is a a Pteronotus. The one on the right is one of my favorite bats, Mormoots, which is the ghost-faced bats. Both of these are insectivorous, but you have nectivorous, frugivorous. What else do you have? Nectivorous, and then you have also the Noctilio, which feed on fish. So you have all these different species of bats on Jamaica, all filling these different niches as well. It's just kind of a joy to really look at some of these bats. But there are real and significant threats to bats in Jamaica. There's invasive species, feral cats, mining, construction, mongoose, deforestation as well, and guano harvesting, and just general disturbance to caves. All of these do take their toll on bat populations. A lot of people really don't realize that the more you enter these sites, the more you disturb the bats, the less likely they are to stay there. And especially if you stress bats out when they're either heavily pregnant or just given birth, the likelihood of the bats being able to successfully reproduce diminishes, and you can really just start this spiral of decreasing bat populations. And for this reason, the Jamaican flower bat, which is classified as critically endangered according to the IUCN, was thought to be extinct for about 20 years. All the known caves that it was recorded in, numbers just crashed and they just weren't there anymore. And it wasn't until 2010 when NEPA were doing some cave surveys, they rediscovered one cave that has what we think is the last known maternity colony for this species of bats. There's also the Jamaican funnel-eared bat, which is only known from one cave in Jamaica. Population estimate around 250 individuals. We haven't actually been able to verify that, but both species are really hanging on a nice edge. I should point out that while the photo of Phylonycteris is Phylonycteris, the photo on the right-hand side isn't the Natus jamacensis, the Jamaican funnel-eared bats. This is the Cuban funnel-eared bat, because we don't have any living photos of the Jamaican funnel-eared bats. So this is as close as we're going to get for now, anyway. So I really want to talk about these two different species of bats and what we're doing at these two sites to protect them. This is Phylonycteris aphyla. They are a phenomenal bat. The way they fly is just hilarious. They kind of droop their back legs. It's a bit of a lazy flight. They're bright whites. They're really conspicuous. They're just quite fun to watch. And this is them as they're emergent. And we've got some more footage of that. So this is the last known maternity use. Like I said before, the population was rediscovered in 2010. And since then, NEPA really been thinking about how to protect this cave and this population of bats using it. Now, the cave does have threats. It's in Portland Parish, which is obviously becoming extremely desirable, and the rate of development in this is just picking up and up and up. And around the cave sites, we just can look at aerial photography and just see how once fairly low impact site has slowly been nibbled away, and more buildings are being put up around this. So there's actually very little forest cover around this cave nowadays. And this is important because, as I'll go into a little bit later, forest cover is extremely important for this species of bats. Without it, they just won't emerge because they're slow flyers, they're bright whites. They really do need additional cover before they feel really safe to come out. So back in June 2018, when we initially started chatting with NEPA, they pointed out that there's a real risk to this cave, and ideally we need to do some land purchase to protect it. So this was kind of the first initiative that we launched over there, and just started partly prepping our members as well, because without BCI members and membership support and donations, we really wouldn't be able to do what we do. So part of this was just really figuring out what was going on, making sure that we had a plan in place to protect the site once we raised the money, and then raising the money to try and purchase the sites. We also tried to collect as much background information as possible. So on the left, I can get this video to play. This is one of my colleagues, Jason Corbett, who's the director of the Habitat Protection and Restoration team. He is carrying out a LiDAR survey, and this is a handheld LiDAR device. So this is much quicker and easier than the stationary ones that are kind of the more traditional ones. And this allows us to go in and survey cave sites relatively quickly, and also means we can go in at night and cause as little disturbance to a site as possible. And you can see on the right-hand side, this is the LiDAR scan of Stony Hill Cave. For those of you who have not been into caves, especially this cave is a hot cave, so once you get past a little chokehold at the bottom, if I can push my mouse, so once you hit this point, the temperature will rapidly jump, and in here is a minimum of 27 degrees Celsius, usually around mid-30s and between 70–80% humidity. And phytonictrists love this hot, humid environment. Without it, the population won't exist. So one, we can kind of see what makes this cave fairly unique and what properties allow this like chokehold to lock in this temperature and humidity. It also allows us to see where the cave runs underground. And it's really disorientated. It's hot, it's humid, it's dark, so you don't want to disturb the bats. And to start with, we really thought the cave went underneath the houses behind the hill, when actually you see part of the cave here goes underneath this road. So one of the first things very well to identify is that how this cave is under threat if there's any development to this road. So with NEPA, we really identified where the vulnerable sites are on the roads. Because if you tap into this cave, it'll create air circulation through it, which will immediately eliminate the crucial temperature and humidity component that phytonictrists really need to breed. So this is one of the first things we did just to allow us to see the lie of the land. And the great thing with LiDAR is that we can go back and resurvey this cave. This version is accurate to about 1 centimeter, which means we can go back and do repeated scans. And if there's any structural abnormalities with the cave, this will identify it pretty quickly. We can jump in and maybe stick some aggro props in to make sure there's not a collapse. So this is where the cave actually runs underneath the ground. So you can see this is the part, and a significant portion of the cave is actually under this road, and actually goes onto the other side where some other houses as well. But this area of forest is crucial. And I've got some more video footage to show you in a bit to show that. But the amount of forest cover is just slowly diminishing. This patch here is no longer, there's now a building right here. So slowly but surely, this forest patch is getting whittled away. We also knew that feral cats were a problem in Jamaica. There'd been no record of feral cats predating on phytonictrists at this site. But one thing we wanted to do is just sort of double check this. And sure enough, as soon as we stuck some camera traps out, unfortunately, the photo on the right is, I think this is actually a domestic cat, but with phytonictrists in its mouth. And I had the unenviable job of going through nights and nights worth of video footage, unfortunately, of cats catching bats. And I've got an example to show you now. And these cats are extremely agile, and they're able to pluck out phytonictrists from the sky. Partly because of the way they fly, that they're much broader wings, they're much slower flyers than something faster like mormoots. But critically, what we did find out is that within the month of May, when these bats are given birth, we had, in 28 nights, we had 87 bat fatalities through the cats. But actually, as you went on throughout the year, the number of bat fatalities decreased. So I think that's happening is that the heavily pregnant females or the new young as they come out are more vulnerable to the cats. And as the bats get older and not pregnant, they're a little bit more agile and able to avoid the cats, and the cat partners' interests as much. There really are peaks in bat mortality. Unfortunately, they're the crucial time for the bats as well. So this is something that we need to address, and I'll go into how we're going to do that in a really sustainable way. But one of the reasons why cat predation was never thought to be an issue at this cave was, as we found out with the camera traps, mongoose were just removing the evidence. So the cats would just catch the bats, half the time just play with them and not do anything else, and leave the carcasses on the ground. But then just before sunrise, the mongoose would come in and hoover everything up, in bones and all, which is why we never found any evidence before. So it really showed the importance of the camera traps at this site. There's also disturbance through guano harvesting, especially people going in, and we really want to eliminate this threat, because actually the guano from nectivorous back caves like this is awful fertilizer anyway. So part of this, we're going to work with NEPA, just do community outreach and education, and try and minimize the disturbance from human activities going down in the cave. I'm pleased to say in December 2021, we were successful in purchasing the area in which Stony Hill Cave is located. So we gave this, worked with NEPA, so the NRCA now holds the title to this. So this site is now protected in perpetuity for the bats, which is great because, so this is the land parcel we purchased. We're looking into actually purchasing the second parcel of land. You can see the parcel of forest that was removed with this house going in underneath. And essentially we want to protect all this remaining forest cover around the cave. And why is actually really interesting. We all these little white dots you see are Phyllonectris. And what you're viewing is drone footage. We had a drone just hovering above the forest with infrared camera, thermal camera. And what we saw is that when the bats initially come out of the cave, they pretty much stay within the forest. And they're doing this because they just don't want to emerge and be too obvious. So what they're doing is wait until they hit a large enough cluster, and then they'll leave. And I think it's just safety in numbers. But I think the forest patch is really important. So we really just want to make sure that this whole forest patch is protected. So that way the bats aren't as stressed out before they leave, and then they can leave when they feel ready. So that's kind of the plan. Obviously, we've done one bit of land purchase. We're going to do a second bit of land purchase. We're going to work towards minimizing cat predation, guano harvesting, and there's a bigger project that we're starting to launch with NEPA in looking at foraging areas, foraging like main food types, so we can think about protecting the larger landscape work as well. Now, I want to quickly move on because I'm conscious of everyone's time and talk about St. Clair Cave. Now, this cave, which is in St. Catherine's Parish, has to be, in my opinion, one of the most important caves in the whole of the Caribbean, if not globally. This has at least 2 million bats in, at least 11 different species of bats. It is a phenomenal, phenomenal site. And it just looks gorgeous as well. I was lucky enough to bring some team members. Josh took this photo, and he really does capture just the number of bats emerging. When you actually start to zoom in and just see all the different bat species, it's pretty unique to have so many different bat species in one frame. And it just really shows the importance of the site. And it's the last known site for the Jamaican funnel-eared bats. There's no threat of development to the site. It's pretty remote, but one thing we really want to do is work with the local community in just ensuring this site could be as well protected in sort of perpetuity as possible. And again, similar to Stony Hill Cave, we started doing some of the surveys, which included going in and just trying to find the Jamaican funnel-eared bats. We didn't catch it. We caught clusters of the Cuban funnel-eared bats. We're still working on identifying Jamaican funnel-eared bats, but as you can imagine, with an estimated 2 million bats and like using the cave and an estimated population size of Jamaican funnel-eared bat at 250 individuals, it is a slight needle in a haystack. We really want to confirm where they are. So this is one of my colleagues, Angelo, who's at Rutgers University. He's wading through this nasty water, which is just full up with bat poop. And again, this is a hot, components are at hot cave. Again, over 30 degrees Celsius. This is pretty fresh. Angelo's t-shirt's still pretty clean, but the longer you spend in here, the worse it gets. On the right-hand side, you can also see just how beautiful this cave is. And one thing is, again, courtesy of Joss, we're starting to really capture this information, because I'm very aware that we're really recommending people don't go into some of these sites because of the disturbance that it causes. But at the same time, if we're going in, we kind of want to capture as much information as possible, so we can start creating display boards, and especially at the local community as well, to start showing the importance of these sites, but also just how beautiful they are as well. And this video kind of just shows how impressive this cave is. This is the final section of the cave before the main exit. And in this amphitheater, you just get thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of bats circling around until it gets dark enough. And you see them going out light sampling, going back in, going back out, going back in, until it hits the sort of the light levels in which the different species of bats like, and then they start all pouring out. I have to say, it's a real privilege to actually be in there and just watching some of this. This was all done with infrared cameras, so I'm just sitting in the dark, filming all of this. And again, we're working with NEPA and other partners to really see how we can do surveys to create as minimum as possible disturbance to the bats. And we've got some other footage to show how effective we're being in that. But there's so many bats in this cave, they can't all fly out at the same time. So this was a camera trap I was putting in to see if there was any cat predation. Instead, I'm just recording there's just not enough fly space. So you get bats crawling up the walls, on the floor, to try and get out. And this is all the bats emerging. And again, it's just a truly astonishing sight, just watching all of these bats coming out. But again, with all of the sites that we're finding in Jamaica, cat predation is an issue. And we did some plots of on the main exit, especially where you saw the bats crawling up. And in 1 hour, we collected 20 pairs of bat wings within the small 1 meter. I think we had 3 1 meter square plots. So we know in 1 hour, we had 20 bats that were killed and discarded within those plots. And that's not including some of the bats that might have been killed and moved outside of those plots. Or you also find the cockroaches are very good at and effective at just scaring away with the evidence as well. But you can see here from bottom right, it's just carnage in there. And this is happening on a nightly basis. So one of the things we did do was we collected the wings. And we actually did all this in our hotel room, which, yeah, they weren't overly happy about, but we extracted the DNA, we did the PCRs. So we knew that before we even left that the majority of the bats being killed, at least in the plots that we were recording, was Monophilus and Mormoops. And realistically, this makes sense. Mormoops is one of the most dominant bats in the cave, so I think it's just law of probability. If you stick your hand out, you're probably going to catch one of these. Monophilus is a nectivore. It has these really broad wings. It flies pretty slowly, so it's just more vulnerable to cats because it just can't maneuver and avoid them as quickly. Mormoops is actually a very quick fly, so I think it really is just the cats are sticking their paws up and just getting them. Due to the level of cat predation, we really want to figure out long-term sustainable solutions. And working with Pacific Rim Conservation, they've been doing this a long time to exclude cats from bird sanctuaries. And this is a picture of a predator-proof fence in Hawaii. These are great. There's no killing of cats involved, which is something we want to avoid as well. But the way these fences are constructed, you can see there's this hood coming down on this image on the right-hand side. And the way this works is that cats, if they get caught within the fence, can really effectively jump out and just go on their merry way. But this hood is designed to stop cats jumping in. And Pacific Rim experts on this have got hours worth of footage showing cats being able to climb out but not being able to climb back in. So this seems an ideal situation for both St. Clair and Stony Hill. And this way, these fences generally have a 20 to 30 year minimum lifespan, especially with proper maintenance. And this way we can make sure that the bats are protected and the cats are excluded and they can just find other areas to go and play. Because a lot of the time, from all the footage that unfortunately I had to watch, the cats aren't eating the cats aren't eating the bats. They're just doing it for fun, and then they just discard the remains on the ground. So anything we can do to minimize this, the better, because we just really don't want to stress out the bats. Again, this is an example of an area the Pacific Rim are doing in Hawaii, and you can't really see it too well, but they are experts in putting these fences in really remote places. And we're really lucky. We're working with a great fencing contractor in Jamaica. Everything Fencing have been phenomenal in working with the local polyground community, who have helped tremendously in moving all the fencing materials to this pretty remote area. And then they've been starting to construct the fence. So this is phase one of the fence. You can see on the right-hand side around the St. Clair site. Then we're going to have the hood put on, which is one of the other phases of the project, which is happening as we speak. So once it's all completed, this is really the main threat to this site. We make sure there's no cat predation at this site, and then we're going to move on and do exactly the same at Stony Hill as well. And then one thing we're really keen on doing is, obviously, I'm based in the US. We've got other team members in like Central America, Latin America. We don't have anyone in the Caribbean at present. So what we really want to do is trying to build capacity and give, especially colleagues at NEPA, the capability of kind of doing these surveys without relying on us coming over. So we've been testing out different models of survey methods, using infrared cameras, using eDNA, just trying to figure out the best way to do rapid surveys that, if more thorough surveys are needed, we're obviously more than welcome, happy to come in, but just trying to make sure there's the capacity in country to do this. And monitoring impact. One of the things we want to do is make sure that as we start speaking to community members and start really highlighting the difference in bat guano and the advantages and especially disadvantages of using the wrong type of guano, how this impacts the visitation rates at sites as well. And we're currently using camera traps that link up with the cell tower, so it just immediately beams all the information to our computers, which makes things slightly easier to monitor as well. And also just thinking of alternatives with COVID, Ukraine, the price of fertilizer has really shot up. So it's understandable people want to collect bat guano because it is, well, the right type of bat guano is an effective source of fertilizer. One of the best source of fertilizer is from the bats that actually use in people's houses. So the insectivorous bats, it's the chitin that's in the guano that's really effective as fertilizer. So a lot of bats in caves will be the frugivorous, the nectivorous bats. So it's just awful as fertilizer goes. But we know there's a conflict between bats and houses. So what we really want to do is, and we're just designing different concepts of bat boxes. This is one that just a stock photo I've used from Florida, but we're designing smaller bat boxes that we're going to hopefully put up in Jamaica in the next few months, maybe 6 months, to really attract bats to use these sites, and then the guano will just fall underneath and people can collect it. And hopefully that way we can take the stress off bats using houses and provide alternative routes for them, and easy methods to collect bat guano as well, because I really don't like going in hot caves. They're nasty, nasty environments. So I'm pretty sure if I'm a guano harvester, I'd kind of want to find easy alternatives as well. So we're really working on ways to do that. And also just working with community outreach. We've got some stickers already that we're designing. Hopefully there's going to be a few more on the cards as well. When I was in Jamaica in May, we gave a talk to the local primary school in Polyground. One of my colleagues at UT Austin, we provided her some information. She's involved in the summer education program. So we hope to sort of provide the materials that can be used to really provide the information that people need to dispel some of the misconceptions about bats and really admire them for the amazing creatures that they are. And as mentioned, I'm going to be back with my team in November, and this is really part of field testing a lot of this work, which I just pause that. Using this infrared monitoring of bat colonies, which is really proven a really successful way of doing this without disturbing the bats, especially Phyllonictris. They're really, really light phobic. So anything that we do that involves even red light tends to disturb them a little bit. So my next video, here we go. So this is Phyllonictris that we're filming with in complete darkness. This is with infrared lamps. And you can see here, they're just carrying on doing their normal business. There's some bats grooming themselves. And we've even gone in with a infrared sort of night vision scope. And I've gone into the cave and I've actually stood next to Phyllonictris that are just hanging, doing their thing, grooming themselves. And if I wanted to, I could probably just pluck one off the wall. It's a really good way of going in, and we can start monitoring numbers this way and just record them, because most of them are fairly stationary on the wall. So we can start building population health numbers, looking at breeding condition, and just building up this basic life history trait that's desperately needed for these really rare and endangered bats. And then for the really rare bats, like the Jamaican funnel-eared bats, and there's also a Jamaican red bat that hasn't been seen in years as well. We're starting to look at other methods, such as eDNA, to detect rare species. So I was over one of my last visits, we were taking water samples, and from these water samples, you can start to look at what bat DNA is in the water, so from their pee or poop or their saliva when they come in to drink. And we're also testing out airborne eDNA as well. So this is air filters, and we can stick in caves, sucks all the air onto another filter paper, and then we can look at that filter paper and just see what bat DNA we're picking up. And especially for these rare species, it could be a really effective way of just seeing if they're present in the area. And if they are present, we can start using other methods like infrared video to see if we can find out more information there. So I realize I've been talking probably, I think, for my allotted time. Again, I really wanted to thank everyone involved in this, especially Josh, Melky, Brock, for taking all the amazing photos. This is one of our new team members, Jennifer, who came on our last trip and was a hit with all the school kids. And I really can't thank the members of the Polyground community in St. Catherine's Parish enough for all their hospitality, for the time we spent when we've been at St. Clair Cave as well. I think I have time for questions. I'm more than happy to answer any questions about this work, about bats in Jamaica in general. Although, to be honest, I'm really a specialist on these two critically endangered bats for now, but I dabble in some of the others.
John, thank you so much for that presentation. I know I really learned quite a bit about bat research in general and about bats here in Jamaica. There are quite a few questions in the chat already. The first one we have, are there any other species sharing the cave with Phyllonictris?
Yes. So that's a very good question. And there's Pteranotus in the first part of the chamber, and And this is again where the LiDAR has been really helpful in just helping us visualize where these different species are coming in. So the Pteranotis are in the first chamber, which they're the insectivorous bats, and then the Phylonicterus is really in the hot component at the back.
Great. So the second question we have, how does climate impact our bats and their habitats in Jamaica? We're currently enduring a long period of drought.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. We've been stressing about this a lot as well. And not just in Jamaica, just everywhere really. Climate change is probably one of the biggest long-term threats that we have for bats. And I mean, you mentioned with drought, but it's also the severity of storms as well and frequency of storms. We've got big projects in Fiji right now. They generally avoid any tropical cyclones, but a couple of years back, they got hit by a big one. And there we've got a cave that's the last known maternity roost for one species of bat. You could easily see some species getting wiped out because of the loss of a cave. And I mean, with Stony Hill and St. Clair, you've got really good examples as well. The drought is a really interesting point. And one thing that we have noticed with St. Clair, that even during a period of drought, there's underground water sources within the cave system itself. St. Clair is almost 3 kilometers long tunnel system, and there are pockets of water in there. And again, I think this is one of the crucial things for this cave and why it can support so many bats, because it has these resources. Stony Hill doesn't have standing water in it, but for Phylonicterus, because they're nectivorous, they tend to rely on water from their food. But again, if there are droughts and there's less flowering plants, that is going to really impact the bats. So one of the biggest things I think we can do is find out the food types for a lot of these species and really promote those plants growing and in different locations as well. So if there's more opportunities for them to go and feed, hopefully in this period of extended drought, there's going to be some areas where there is some food, whereas and again, just creating resiliency within the system.
Okay, our next question. The predator exclusion fencing is perfect for keeping out cats, but will also keep out ground-dwelling or non-flying troglophiles. Is that not a problem?
Yes, it is the quick answer. It's kind of the lesser of two evils, really, that we're not proposing to do this for everything, for example. The fence does have some permeability to it. It's really stopping cats, rats, mongoose. It's also the ones that we know are issues for bats. So some really small things can still fit through the fence. And for St. Clair and Stony Hill, it's really a last option, but I feel it is the only option just because the pressure the bats are facing with the cat predation.
Okay. Next, it would be great to connect with the Caribbean Veterinary Association. They're keen on promoting One Health initiatives and can perhaps aid in mobilizing an education campaign or free clinics for spay or neuter of cats in the area. So that's a comment or a suggestion. Next, is the Jamaican red bat one of the 5 endemics, and do you think it might be extinct?
It is one of the endemics. I really hope it's not extinct. I can't see why it would be. That bat is a tree roosting bat that can forage over pretty large areas. One of the problems with it, because it is a tree roosting bat, it's just hard to find. And realistically, that there hasn't been the technology back in the 70s. I mean, it was really just caught by sheer luck. So one of the things we want to do once we kind of solve the most pressing issues with Stony Hill and St. Clair is to expand the project and start doing more acoustic monitoring to really detect Lazarus and do more eDNA surveys. So we're still waiting to get the eDNA out of Jamaica, but that's one of the things we want to do, and it's going to be really interesting when those results come out, and we're going to expand that as well.
Okay, great. Next question. If someone wanted to attract bats nearer to a farm in Jamaica to help with culling insects, how would you encourage a person to do so? Bats already visit our property to eat mangoes, so I know they are around, but how can we attract them to stay?
So I'm just trying to process my thoughts on this one. The interesting thing about bats is that you may have way more bats visiting the farm than you know of. The fruit bats are more conspicuous because they tend to do the night perches, feed on the fruits and then drop them. But the insectivorous bats, especially St. Clair's a prime example of this. The majority of bats used in that cave are insectivorous, and they will fly large distances away from the cave site. If you're at your farm with a bat detector at night, I can guarantee you're going to have insectivorous bats flying over. The best way to make sure the insectivorous bats are used in the farm is to really make sure you don't use ivermectins or any chemical on livestock that will leach into the poop of the livestock, because that will really hinder insect abundance, and then the bats just won't come near there. But yeah, it's as far as attracting them to roost, I mean, Jamaica, especially with the number of caves and the landscape as a whole, there are roosting opportunities. So just because you don't see them roosting, I suspect you've got pretty good diversity of bats coming out at night.
How does one protect their homes or buildings from bats without doing harm to them? You mentioned they're a real challenge in terms of homes in the roofs.
Yeah, so I sympathize with anyone with bats in their roof, and I'm a bat biologist. And why I say this is that in the past, bat colonies would be at such a low level in someone's roof, you probably wouldn't even know that they're there. But as more people start to develop houses and do more modifications to buildings that exclude bats anyway, and builders are getting far better at just closing up any holes, it means you're pushing bats out of this diverse range of habitats into relatively few. And I haven't been involved in any of this in Jamaica, so I'm kind of speaking on experience from other locations as well. By piling more bats into one house, you can start to get an issue where you get smells, urine stains, which then does become an issue. And I think this is one of the things that we're looking at with NEPA, and just looking at these bat boxes that we can put them on in areas. One of the areas we're exploring right now is Hope Gardens, where they can be up, and because obviously once they're up and being used, you don't want to disturb them. So we can stick these bat boxes up and provide alternative roosting environments for them. And we're doing this really successfully in Miami. So there's the Florida bonted bats in Miami that's endemic to Florida, extremely rare, and suffering from exactly the same pressures as urban-based bats everywhere. And we've now created the largest known population of Florida bonted bats in their entire range, simply by erecting bat boxes. So in the next 6 months, we're going to install, I think, 2 bat boxes in Jamaica, monitor to see how well they're being used by what species. We might have to do some modifications, but the long-term plan is to have alternative roosting spaces for bats. So if we know that bats are being excluded from properties, we can find land that we can put these new artificial roosts up, which are hurricane-proof as well, and provide alternative accommodation for them.
Okay, thank you. Someone says, I got confused with the guano part. Is there anything such as illegal extraction of guano? In your pictures, there are people with bags.
Yeah, so guano harvesting is tricky because we as an organization, we never want to stop people collecting guano if it's an important part of them growing their crops, their livelihoods. People have been doing this for decades, and for someone, especially a US-based organization, to come in and tell someone to stop, for me, it's just not the right thing to do. And this is why we're trying to work and just provide the information to people, especially if people are spending money and driving to sites and collecting guano from nectivorous bats, frugivorous bats. They're either putting dirty sugar water on their crops, or even worse with the frugivorous bats, putting seed-laced guano on their crops, which can have some obviously deleterious effects to their crops. But in some caves, especially where you have cats, toxoplasmosis is an issue, and toxoplasmosis doesn't die that easily. And this is especially for pregnant women and young children, it can make you seriously ill. So there's a public sort of health and safety risk to this as well. And using insectivorous bat guano collected from underneath bat boxes, again, I'm not a healthcare professional, so don't quote me on this, but it's probably the safest form of using guano as fertilizers you can get. But with a lot of these caves, people don't know the land ownership. People have just been going in, scooping guano up and putting them in bags and then taking them back for their own personal use. At low levels in some caves, that's fine. In other caves, especially when you have the last known population of a critically endangered species, it's less okay. But again, this is where public education really comes into play. And I found that people just don't know. And once you start giving people the information that it's the wrong type of guano, the disturbance will actually decrease bat numbers, which will decrease the availability of guano. There are times in which you can collect guano to cause minimal disturbance of bats. People are reasonable, they just don't know. So this is one of the reasons why we're trying to provide more information to people, so we can do things as respectfully as possible.
Okay, thank you, John. Another question. Is the flower bat found in any other cave in Jamaica?
So this is actually really exciting. So if you tuned into Phil's talk earlier on, there was, he did some field work earlier this year, and he started finding Phyllonycterus in other sites, which I had never ever recorded them in before, which was mind-boggling to me. Kind of made me doubt my own skills as a bat biologist. So we went to one of these sites on our May trip, and we stuck our harp traps, and we got very different results than him. And again, I think this kind of goes back to how little information we have about Phyllonycterus and their life history traits. We didn't catch any pregnant females, but he had caught some females in his earlier survey. And again, further work is needed on this. This is just me speculating. What I suspect is happening is that Stony Hill Cave is the only known maternity roost. But outside of the maternity season, the females are bomb bursting further out, which would make complete sense, because if there's a few thousand bats in there, a few thousand bats congregating in one site is putting an extreme load on the resources in that one area. Now, I think they're using the cave because it's still the only known hot cave that we know that they're in, and it's probably really vital for rearing their young. And there are bats using it throughout the whole year, so it's probably subpopulations going out and using other sites, and non-pregnant females or early pregnant females can probably cope with slightly cooler conditions, or they find microclimates within the cave. So this is really work in progress, and like Phil and myself, and we need to encourage more bat work in Jamaica to really start finding out what's happening outside in the maternity season and how many other caves are being used as well. But yeah, it's really exciting. This is the thing. I got out of academia because I want to do conservation, but I'm still an academic at heart. So these research questions and using the drone as well is really fun new technology that we can use to look at the flight patterns of these bats. And you can fly the drone up high enough that it doesn't disturb the bats, which we're really reluctant to stick radio tags on these bats, especially that we want to minimize disturbance at this cave. So this is a really good way for us. And with the drone, we've even captured footage of them feeding on various trees that we can then go out during the day and just figure out which trees they're feeding on. So it's with the eDNA, with the infrared, with the drone, there's so much more technology out there now that we can use that hasn't been before. And this is only just increasing as well. Oh yeah, and the other thing we're doing this autumn is collecting guano from Phyllonycterus and then doing genetics on that, so we can really start to drill in more all the different food plants that they're feeding on.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much, John. The next question. What advice do you have for doing community outreach and connecting with community members to give a stronger appreciation for endemic wildlife?
Now, this is going to be a really stupidly simple answer, but I think just spending time with them. We were based in Polyground for 5 days, and this is a community within St. Catherine's Parish. No one had really ever spoken about bats before, and by us being there, going out with our bat detectors, walking around, they could hear the bats, they could see them flying over. We gave a presentation, we showed some of these photos that we've taken. It just starts to really connect people with nature. And a lot of this is people just don't know. I mean, really, and I think Damani's on this call, and so he's with NEPA. His knowledge of, I mean, he's an amazing naturalist anyway, but his knowledge really just benefits me being in Jamaica as well, because there's just so much biodiversity and there's so much to learn. This is one of the reasons why I keep coming back to Jamaica, because it's just phenomenal, all the stuff around that. I think once you start taking people out, doing walks, doing talks, I think the momentum is there. And I mean, we're going to go back and give more talks at this one community, and I think it can just grow and build on from there. I really want to get more bat capacity in Jamaica, and we're working to see how we can get that sorted as well. And yeah, hopefully we're going to be given a bat walk and talk later this year when myself and the team come down, and everyone here is invited to that as well, because the more the merrier.
Yes, awesome. We're definitely going to work on organizing that. Are there any other questions in the chat? Any raised hands? We don't have any raised hands. Anyone else?
If there are any questions, feel free to email me. I haven't stuck my email address on, but I'm sure you can find it. I'm easily on the B-side.
Email. Okay, there is another question. Is there any bat captures?
You know, I try and minimize how much we capture bats. Partly, this is just setting a good example for the communities which we work in as well. And also, there are real case examples of bat researchers being the reason why bats have abandoned caves. And you can over-research a site. So we do capture bats, obviously, because we have to collect some information from them. Did I capture any bats? on our last trip. I think we caught one or two at Stony Hill to get some better photos. But a lot of the photos you see now, we're trying to get the photos of the bats emerging. So while the flashes are obviously causing some disturbance, it's a lot less of a disturbance than capturing, handling them, sticking them in bags. So yeah, I doubt in the November trip we will do any capturing, but we will definitely watch the bats as they emerge. And I love watching bats flying around, especially with the echometer touches. You can just stick the bat detector onto your phone and turn your smartphone into a bat detector. And it's just great looking at the echolocation calls, seeing the bats flying over. And for me, that's one of the biggest joys.
Okay, great. Far less invasive as well. Cecile has a question. Cecile, please go ahead.
Yes, very interesting presentation from all kinds of directions. My question is, you mentioned raising funds to buy property in order to protect the caves. Do you have any stipulations that, and you say you turn the property over to NEPA? Do you have any stipulations that they must meet? Are you checking periodically to verify that they're doing what you needed them to do in order to protect the land that you purchased?
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why we're trying to set up these different methods for monitoring. And obviously everyone is stretched, and the last thing we want to do is create additional efforts that are just going to start being deleterious to kind of the wider conservation efforts. So the camera traps that we're using that link in with cell phone towers, they kind of need servicing once every 6 months, but like we can view them, NEPA can view them, and that way we can start really monitoring the effectiveness of this. And we also, especially in polygrounds, we're employing local community wardens who will do the monitoring for us, and also look at the maintenance of the fence if there are any storms. So we're, as part of the purchase of, I mean, we're only purchasing Stony Hill Cave, but that comes with its own management plan that we're working with NEPA to make sure that we have all the effective tools in place to make sure that we can make sure that everything is working well. And if it's not, what needs to change to make sure that it is. For polyground, it's obviously a different situation. We're really just trying to exclude the cats. And again, we're going to have camera traps in there to make sure that that is working as well.
So you have no stipulations that say you put in the fence, you need to make sure that nobody's developing within 500 yards of the fence?
Well, I mean, we, so for St. Clair Cave, that's on a private land, that's a huge land parcel. There's no intention of developing on that land. What we are doing is we've done a LiDAR scan of St. Clair Cave as well. So one of the recommendations we're giving to NEPA is once that's all done, we're looking at watersheds. So we'll have our recommendation of no development zone, just in case that happens in the future. With Stony Hill, obviously we purchased the one land parcel, we're going to do the other one. That's as big a buffer as you can get around that site, because everything else is developed around it anyway. The biggest thing for Stony Hill is making sure there's no further loss of tree cover, and making sure that the fencing is working both in terms of people and cats. So that's kind of the stipulations in just making sure that the threats to the bats are effectively eliminated. And part of this is making sure we know what all the threats are and making sure we know how to monitor those in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cecile. There's a comment from Mariah. She says, great, she was the one that had the question about bat captures. During her fieldwork in Colombia, they taught me how to catch bats with a net. But for your project, I see that it would be better to have minimum manipulation of specimens of the species, pardon me, example eDNA, but this process is longer and more expensive than doing the taxonomical identification. would you consider both forms of identification?
Oh, absolutely. There's no silver bullet to this. And partly just because of the time I had to give this talk. What I didn't talk about is in the early days, so in, or was it May 2019, December 2019, we came in with a big 10-person team and we stuck up heart traps outside all the entrances to all these caves and basically tried to catch as many bats as possible. And for people who have never heard of a heart trap, these aren't like bird mist nets, which if you have thousands of bats coming in, you just can't use mist nets. It's just awful for bats, and just awful for the people trying to extract the bats from the nets. Heart traps are these rectangular frames with 2 to 3 banks of about 50 lines of fishing wire going down that's slightly offset with a collection bag at the bottom. So that we were catching the bats and looking at which bats we had. And on our trip in May, we actually did the same with some heart traps at the site that Phil caught Phyllonicterus. So that way we handle bats. And again, it was critical for this site for Phyllonicterus in just identifying the sex of the Phyllonicterus we were getting. The problem with some of these sites, especially with the sites that have thousands of bats in, trying to get a good representation of the different species there is really tricky, especially with the Jamaican funnel-eared bat. It's like a needle in the haystack. We caught a lot of Chila natalus, caught no natalus. So yeah, I agree. It's important to catch bats at certain points, and like our May study is a good example that we had to catch them to do the sex identification and just look at reproductive states. But just thinking long term, I really like sort of flash surveys to really hone in where the priority conservation efforts should focus. And if we can use things like infrared camera, eDNA, to do these quick, relatively low cost and fast surveys of caves, that can really show if we do need to go and catch bats, where those efforts are needed. Because I don't want to catch bats at every single cave in Jamaica, because it just causes too much disturbance.
Okay, thank you so much for that, John. Are there any other questions or comments? No?
Thank you for the questions.
Wait.
One more.
Oh, there's a comment from Damani. He says the red bat is also particularly tricky to survey.
Yeah, Lazarus are just a nightmare to try and find, because these tree roosting bats just so difficult. Acoustics, I think, is really going to be one of the ways ahead for this species of bat, but our bandwidth is fairly limited, so we really focused on the 2 critically endangered bats for now. But that, like I said before, it's the next phase of the project.
Okay, Emma, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yes, just a quick question, and I'm thinking to myself, how do we get Jamaicans to really love bats? And I mean, I think they're incredibly cool, but I know a lot of Jamaicans don't, and think, oh no, oh, horrid little things. And you know, I wish more Jamaicans appreciated bats.
I think it's just spreading the word. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I'm always happy to give talks about bats, no matter where I go. And like when we're in Polyground, I mean, I've given 2 or 3 talks there now. Everywhere I go, I will talk about bats. And I think hitting the kids early on with this information, I think really helps. And this is why we've got all these bat stickers as well, because the kids just love them and they like go and show their parents. It's not an overnight thing, but I think once you start gaining momentum on this, and the more sort of school teachers I talk to, and the more we can kind of introduce that into some of their classes, the better. I mean, obviously I'm just really working in like a couple of small communities in Jamaica, but I think the more people that can talk about this, the more that you can talk to people about it. There are really good resources online, like on BCI's website. There's Bat Week, which is in October. There's a good, I forget the website for that. I think it's batweek.org. there's loads of materials on that. Yeah, there's information out there. It's a case of disseminating it, but I think the more we can talk about it, the better, really.
Okay, thank you so much. There is another question. Do bats respond to the phases of the moon?
Yes, very much so. If you ask any bat researcher, you do not try and catch bats with full moon. A lot of species of bats are lunophobic, and they'll alter their flight behavior just because it's so bright. Phylonyctrus, I can guarantee, is one of those species of bats. If it's too light, they really alter their behavior. So yeah, they're tricky individuals to catch and research at the best of times. And again, this is why some of them are so misunderstood, and we just don't know enough about them to protect them as well.
Wow. Okay. Cecile has a comment. I appreciate your approach to Jamaicans. You understand that people really just need information and exposure. There are also several comments saying thank you. They've learned so much. Really was an interesting presentation. I learned a lot. Quite a bit of I learned a lot. Are there any other questions? No?
Well, I will keep everyone posted when we're going to be back in town in November.
November, yes, we can organize that.
Yeah, hopefully we can get the bat walk up and sorted, and we can sort of talk more about the project and future plans then as well.
Okay, awesome. John, thank you so much. This really was quite an interesting way of looking at Jamaicans. We like to call them rat bats. So they're more like rats for us than anything else, and not really something that we want to engage with. It's interesting now you say they respond to the phases of the moon. Thank you for that question, Lisa. So if they're not out when it's a full moon, then clearly this is not something that people want to have anything to do with. But it really has been quite interesting and enlightening to learn some of the new research methods that we can apply and how this can contribute to conservation of our endemics. So thank you so much for this. More comments, not a question, just a thank you for this meeting, even though I was late. You are most welcome. Okay, so we will continue to keep everyone posted about our arrangements for the Bat Walk in November. So please continue to, if you are on our WhatsApp or email, pay attention and watch our social media pages as well. Thank you so very much, John. Thank you everyone for coming. Oh, wait.
Cool.
There are 2 more questions as we're wrapping up. One, do bats respond to the tides of the earth? I wonder if that's like neap tides?
You know what? I've never been asked that before, and I do not know. Sorry, that's a question I can't answer. That's an interesting one. I never thought about it.
Okay, because I know, well, neap tides also have to do with the moon as well, the gravitational pull. Yes. Is there a location near Ligani? What kind of location? Like a bat roost? I think there's
yeah, Jamaica is so diverse. I can guarantee there are bats pretty much everywhere.
In that area, okay. Well, this is an opportunity for everyone to pay a little bit more attention at night to see what's going on in your backyards, your front yards, anything that you see happening around you. Now you can pay attention. Perhaps you have bats around and you haven't noticed them before.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Once again, thank you, John. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. This was the last of our 2-part series on bats in Jamaica, or Bats of Jamaica. So please continue to listen out for other exciting webinars that we will be hosting in the months to come. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
See ya. Good evening.